The world shifted beneath my feet. What? She recognizes your face but not your identity. It's called psychogenic amnesia. It happens in rare cases of extreme stress. I couldn't breathe. That's not possible. I'd like to arrange a visit, he continued, his voice calm, measured. But please prepare yourself, it may be difficult. I agreed, because what else could I do? But when I arrived at the clinic a few days later, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Elena sat in a small, sterile room, staring blankly at the window. When I walked in, she barely glanced at me. "Elena," I whispered. She turned her head, eyes empty. Then she frowned as if trying to place me. "I'm sorry," she said hesitantly. "Do I know you?" The floor vanished beneath me. I looked at Dr. Vance. He shook his head sympathetically. "This is what I was afraid of. She's lost too much of herself." I tried talking to her, but she kept looking at me like I was a stranger. A few times I thought I saw something in her eyes, recognition, hesitation, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "She needs more time," Vance said. I left that night, shattered. But something felt off. It was in the way she had looked, at me. The way her hands trembled when she spoke. The way she avoided looking at the doctor, as if she wasn't confused, as if she was afraid. And I didn't know it yet. But my wife wasn't sick. She was playing the most dangerous game of her life. I tried to believe them. I tried to convince myself that this was real, that Elena truly didn't remember me, that her mind had fractured under the weight of some unseen trauma. But deep down, something gnawed at me. A quiet, insidious whisper. This isn't right, and once you hear that whisper, you can't unheard it. The night after I saw Elena, I barely slept. I replayed our conversation over and over, searching for something, anything that could explain the eerie feeling in my gut. It was in the way she looked at me. Strangers' eyes wouldn't flicker with recognition before darting away. A woman suffering from amnesia wouldn't grip the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white, as if bracing for something. And then there was Dr. Vance. He was too smooth, too prepared. His words, his tone, it was all too polished, as if he'd practiced delivering the news. And the way he watched me, carefully measuring my reactions, made my skin crawl. The next morning, I called the clinic again. No answer. I called again that afternoon, and the next day, and the day after that. Silence. I started digging. The clinic's website was a bare-bones template, a single page with a vague mission statement and a contact form. No patient reviews, no listed doctors besides Vance, no history. That was my first red flag. Then I checked the business registry. No official licensing. Records? Not in the state, not anywhere. That was my second red flag. Finally, I called the number again, and instead of asking about Elena, I posed as a potential patient's family member. "Oh, we're at full capacity," the woman on the other end chirped. "Do you have a wait list?" "We're a very exclusive facility," she hedged. "So, no." Silence. Then, click. That was my third red flag. I pulled up the only document I had ever signed for them. A patient release form Elena had given me before we left. But when I looked at the paper again, I realized something chilling. It wasn't a release form. It was a transfer of guardianship. I had unknowingly signed legal control of Elena's care over to Dr. Adrian Vance. Panic surged through me. I had to go back. I had to see her. But before I could act, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But something told me I should. "Nathan Carter?" a low voice asked. "Yes." A pause. Then, "Your wife isn't there?" I froze. "Who is this?" "I can't talk long," the voice continued. "But listen to me. Your wife isn't at that facility anymore. She hasn't been for weeks." I gripped the phone tighter. "What the hell are you talking about?" The man sighed, almost impatient. "I work at the clinic. Not by choice. Let's just say I've seen things I shouldn't have. Patients that aren't patients. Money changing hands. People disappearing." "And your wife?" She left a long time ago. Whatever they're telling you is a lie. A sick feeling coiled in my gut. You're saying, I have to go. The voice turned urgent. Stop calling. They're watching you. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. I got in my car that night and drove straight to the clinic. It was almost midnight when I arrived. The building loomed in the darkness, its windows blacked out, the surrounding forest swallowing any sound. The security gate was closed, but I parked down the road and slipped through the trees, staying low. I had no plan, just a desperate need for answers. As I moved closer, I noticed something. There were no lights in the rooms. I never thought my marriage would end in a place like this. Not with shouting accusations or betrayal laid bare. Not with dramatic confessions or another man stepping forward to claim what was once mine. No. It ended quietly, like a well-orchestrated play where I was the only one who didn't know the script. And it all began the night my wife told me she was losing her mind. It was late September, and the heat of the summer was finally giving way to a crisp autumn breeze. I came home from work, tossing my keys on the counter, expecting to hear the usual sounds, music from the kitchen, the faint hum of the TV, the smell of dinner. Instead, I found Elena sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the floor. Her face pale, her eyes hollow. She looked up when she heard me, her expression unreadable. I think something's wrong with me, she whispered. My stomach clenched. What do you mean? She hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of the cushion. I keep forgetting things, small things at first. Where I put my phone, what day it is, but today Her voice wavered. I drove to the store, parked the car, and then I didn't know why I was there. I couldn't remember what I needed. I just stood there, frozen, for 15 minutes before I snapped out of it. I frowned, sitting down next to her. Maybe you're just stressed. You've been working a lot. She shook her head violently. It's not just that. I feel detached, like I'm watching myself from the outside. And sometimes I hear things that aren't there. Footsteps, whispers. She looked at me, pleading. I need help, Nathan. Her distress was so raw, so real that I felt a pang of guilt for even considering the possibility that this was anything but the truth. I held her hand. We'll figure it out. I'll set up an appointment with a neurologist. No. She cut me off quickly. I don't want hospitals. I don't want medication that'll turn me into a zombie. There's a place, a private retreat, a mental health center, but more like a sanctuary. A doctor my friend knows recommended it. He specializes in cases like mine. A private retreat? The idea didn't sit right with me. But Elena wasn't the type to be dramatic. If she was this scared, something had to be seriously wrong. Let me look into it, I said cautiously. She nodded, gripping my hand tighter. Please. I don't want to disappear inside my own mind. A few days later, we drove upstate. The place was deep in a forest reserve, isolated from the city, wrapped in thick pine trees and rolling mist. As we pulled up to the facility, a large modern building with sleek architecture and an almost clinical coldness, I felt a strange unease settle in my chest. It didn't look like a hospital. It looked like a place where people disappeared. Elena, on the other hand, looked relieved, as if stepping into this place was the only thing keeping her sane. A doctor greeted us at the entrance. Dr. Adrian Vance, a tall man in his 40s, silvering hair, piercing blue eyes. His handshake was firm, his presence authoritative but warm. Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter, he said smoothly. Welcome. I know how hard this must be, but you've made the right decision. We'll take good care of her. Something about him unsettled me, but I couldn't put my finger on why. He led us inside, explaining the facility's rules. Limited outside contact, strict schedules, therapy sessions. No personal devices were allowed to reduce external distractions. He said it so matter-of-factly that I didn't question it at the time. Elena handed over her phone without hesitation. I hesitated, but reminded myself that this was for her well-being. Then came the real gut punch. I know it's difficult, Mr. Carter, but it's best if visits are limited. The first month is crucial for her treatment. You can call for updates, but direct contact may hinder progress. A month? That felt extreme. But when I turned to Elena, she looked at me with quiet desperation, as if begging me not to fight this. So I let her go. I kissed her goodbye, promised her I'd be waiting, and left her in the hands of a man I shouldn't have trusted. The first 2 days, I didn't call. I wanted to give her space. On the third day, I dialed the clinic. No answer. The fifth day, no answer. By the seventh day, I was getting frustrated. I called again. This time, someone picked up. A woman. The doctor is currently unavailable, but Mrs. Carter is fine, she said in a rehearsed tone. She's responding to treatment, but she needs time. That was all she would tell me. Days turned into weeks. Each time I called, I was met with vague reassurances. She's progressing, she's adjusting, we appreciate your patience. By the end of the month, I was desperate. I want to see my wife, I told Dr. Vance over the phone. There was a pause, then a sigh. I understand. But there's been a development. She's experiencing severe dissociation. She doesn't remember you. No movement. The place looked abandoned. I crept around the perimeter trying to find another way in. That's when I saw the side door. Unlocked. Inside, the air was stale. Dust clung to the floor. The reception desk was empty. The phone lines disconnected. The whole facility had been shut down. I moved quickly through the halls, checking rooms at random. Every door was open, every bed stripped, every cabinet empty. Elena was gone. They were all gone. I searched for anything, documents, files, records, but the place had been wiped clean, except for one thing. In the office near the back, a single filing cabinet remained. It was locked, but a hard yank broke it open. Inside, I found discharge papers. I flipped through them, scanning the names, and then I found hers, Elena Carter, discharged 3 months ago. I stared at the date. My blood turned to ice. They had kept up the act for 3 more months after. She was gone. Lied to me. Manipulated me. Kept me calling and waiting while she had already moved on. But that wasn't the worst part. At the bottom of the form was her new name, Elena Vance. I was shaking as I left the clinic. By the time I got home, I had already found them. It wasn't even difficult. A new address, a new bank account, a marriage license. She hadn't just disappeared. She had started a new life. With him. With the man who had treated her. With the man who had convinced me she was sick, that she didn't remember me, that she needed more time. I had been the perfect fool. For 3 days, I did nothing. I sat in my house, staring at the walls, trying to understand how it had all happened. And then, on the 4th day, I got another call, the same number. "You found her, didn't you?" the voice asked. I didn't respond. "She's not who you think she is." I gritted my teeth. "Who is she then?" A beat of silence. Then, "She's done this before." The words slammed into me like a fist. "What?" "Elena. That's not her real name. It never was." I gripped the phone, my pulse hammering. "She's married 3 times. All to men with money. All of them. Thought she was in love with them. All of them thought she was sick. And every time..." The man exhaled. "She disappears. With their money. With a new man." My throat went dry. Dr. Vance hadn't brainwashed her. She had played him too. She had played all of us, and now she was going to do it again. I didn't sleep that night. The words kept circling in my head, each one cutting deeper than the last. She's done this before. 3 times. Married, disappeared, started over. I thought about the woman I had loved, the woman I had shared a life with, the woman I had believed was sick and in need of help, the woman I had fought for, and she had been lying from the very beginning. I sat in my darkened living room, staring at the wall, my fingers tightening around the phone. I could let it go. I could pretend she never existed. Pretend she had died. That night in the clinic when she looked me in the eyes and told me she didn't remember me, I could let her slip away into her new life with her new name, just like she had planned. Or I could burn her world down. The next morning, I booked a flight. It wasn't hard to find them. A new city, a high-rise apartment in an expensive neighborhood, a new identity. Dr. Adrian Vance had left behind his practice, his reputation, his entire life to be with her. She had done the same. Only this time she had made one mistake. She had left a trail, a marriage license, a deed to an apartment, even a business venture, a private clinic, just like before. Their entire new life was built on the same lies, the same scam, and now I was standing outside their building, looking up at the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse suite. I waited until I saw movement. A silhouette. She was home. I didn't hesitate. I walked inside, straight past the doorman, and took the elevator up to the top floor. I knocked once, then again. A pause. Then, soft footsteps on the other side of the door. She opened it, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. She didn't slam the door in my face. She didn't scream. She just stood there completely still, her face unreadable. "Elena," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. Her lips parted, just slightly. Then finally, she spoke. "Nathan." She didn't deny it. She didn't pretend. She knew why I was here. She stepped back, her fingers tightening around the edge of the door. "You shouldn't be here," I smiled, a small, humorless thing. "Neither should you." She glanced over her shoulder as if checking to see if he was home. Then she stepped aside and let me in. The apartment was just as I expected. Cold, expensive, lifeless. No photos, no memories, just a stage, waiting for the next act to begin. Sat down on the couch, folding her legs beneath her, watching me carefully. I stayed standing. "When did you figure it out?" she asked. "Not soon enough," I admitted. She exhaled slowly, nodding to herself. "You must be angry." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Angry? Elena, you convinced me you were losing your mind. You let me believe you didn't even recognize me. You let me mourn you." She lowered her gaze, but there was no guilt in her expression. Only calculation. "I needed you to let me go. So you decided to erase yourself instead." She looked up, her eyes searching mine. "Would you have let me go otherwise?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because we both knew the answer. She had always been good at reading people. Good at understanding exactly what they needed to hear, what they needed to believe. She had done it to me. She had done it to Vance. And she would do it again, to someone else, when this life got too small, too boring. "What was I to you?" I asked, my voice quieter now. She tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean?" Was any of it real? For the first time, something flickered across her face. Not regret, not remorse, just curiosity. "Yes," she said finally. "For a while. The worst part was, I believed her." I ran a hand over my face, letting out a breath. "And what about him?" She smiled. "He thinks he saved me." I shook my head. "You don't love him." "No," she admitted. "But I don't think he loves me either. He loves the idea of me. That's enough." There was something chilling about how casually she said it. I looked around the apartment again at the emptiness of it. "So what now? You just keep going? Keep disappearing?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stood up, stepping closer. "I'm not a monster, Nathan," she said softly. "I never wanted to hurt you." I let out a breathless laugh. "That's funny. Coming from someone who faked their own psychological breakdown." She reached out, her fingers ghosting over my wrist. "You can walk away. You can forget this ever happened." My pulse pounded in my ears. I could let her win. I could let her keep doing this, over and over, until she finally got caught, or I could stop her. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope. I set it on the table. "Between us, what is this?" she asked. "Proof," I said. "Of everything." Her fingers brushed the edge of it, but she didn't open it. You had me followed? I started digging, and once I started, I couldn't stop. She didn't look angry. If anything, she looked impressed. What do you want, Nathan? I met her gaze. I want you to disappear. For good. Her expression didn't change, but I saw something shift behind her eyes. You think you can make me? I smiled. No, but I think the police can. She stilled. I leaned in slightly. I know about the other men. I know about the money. I know about the clinic, the fake identities, the marriages. I have everything, Elena. For the first time, she looked uncertain. I picked up the envelope and held it in my hands. I walk out of here and I drop this off at the nearest police station, or... I hesitated. Or you leave. You walk away from this, from him, from everything. And you never do this again. She studied me, her jaw tightening. Then slowly she nodded. How long do I have? 1 week, she let out a breath, a small smirk playing at her lips. You always were a romantic. I turned to leave, and then, just as I reached the door, she spoke again. Nathan? I stopped. She smiled. A real one this time. Take care of yourself. I walked out without looking back. I don't know if she really left. Maybe she's still out there somewhere, weaving her next lie, finding her next mark. Maybe she's already disappeared, slipping into another life, another identity, just like before. Or maybe, just maybe, she really did listen to me. Either way, I'll never know, and I think I'm okay with that. I thought it was over. For the first time in months, I could breathe again. The weight that had been pressing down on my chest, the suffocating uncertainty, the sleepless nights, it all started to fade. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the call from the police, for Adrian Vance to come looking for me, for some desperate attempt from Elena to take back control. But nothing happened. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, I started to believe that I had won. That was my first mistake. 3 weeks after I last saw her, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just my name, scrawled in elegant cursive. My fingers hesitated over the flap, a deep instinct telling me to throw it away, to burn it, to pretend I never saw it. But I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and 4 words. You were almost right. I stared at them, my pulse hammering. The handwriting was familiar. Hers, but sloppier than usual, rushed. My eyes darted to the envelope, looking for anything else, a hidden message, an address, something. And then I saw it. Tucked into the bottom corner of the envelope, barely noticeable, was a train ticket stub. One way. To a city across the country. Dated 2 weeks ago. I sank into my chair, gripping the paper so tightly my knuckles turned white. She had left, but something about it didn't sit right. You were almost right. Almost. The doubt started creeping in again, slithering through the cracks I thought I had sealed. What had I missed? I went back to the files I had gathered, flipping through the records, the fake names, the old addresses, looking for something, anything, that might explain what she meant. And then I saw it, buried in the paperwork from the clinic, in the documentation of her treatment, was an insurance claim filed under Elena's name. Except, it wasn't her name. It was her previous name, the one she had before she met me, the one she had before she met her last husband, the one she had before she disappeared from that life, too. The claim was processed in a state I had never been to, one I had never even known she had lived in. And the date on it? 6 years ago. That was the moment it clicked. She hadn't just done this 3 times. She had done it at least 4, and if I had missed that, what else had I missed? I started digging. Again. This time I wasn't looking for Elena Carter, or Elena Vance. I was looking for the ghosts of her past. It took me another 2 weeks, but I found him. The first husband. Not the ones I already knew about. Not the ones she had scammed in the past 10 years. The very first. The one she had never mentioned. The one she had erased completely. His name was Daniel Wren, and he was dead. A boating accident, according to the official report. His body was never found. They ruled it as drowning, a tragic accident during a weekend getaway. His young wife, her, was devastated. She inherited everything, and 2 months later, she vanished. No one looked for her. No one questioned it. She had played the grieving widow so well that no one suspected a thing. I sat in the dim light of my kitchen, my stomach churning. She hadn't just run from her past. She had buried it. And if I hadn't gone looking, I never would have known. I needed air. I stepped outside, the cold night air biting at my skin, my head spinning. Had I just let a murderer go free? The thought made my stomach turn. I reached for my phone, my fingers hovering over the number for the police. I could turn her in. I had the documents, the evidence, the connections. But then I thought of the letter. You were almost right. Was this a warning? A taunt? Or was it something else? I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe. She had been telling me something, and then, suddenly I understood. I had been looking at it all wrong. I had assumed she was a con artist, a manipulator, a woman who moved from man to man, taking what she needed before disappearing. And she was. But that wasn't all she was. She had never run from those men. She had eliminated them. And now, she was gone. I thought about Adrian Vance sitting in their penthouse, probably still thinking he was the one in control, the one making the decisions. I wondered if he had received a letter too, or if one day soon he would simply disappear, just like the others, just like Daniel Wren, just like the men before him, and then, maybe a year from now, maybe 5, someone else would go looking, and by then she would be long gone, with a new name, a new life, and a new story. I should have turned her in. I should have exposed everything. But as I stood there, staring at the train ticket, I realized the truth. I wasn't afraid of her. I was in awe of her. She had outplayed all of us. And maybe deep down, a part of me wanted her to win. Because, if there was one thing I knew for sure, she always did.